I stopped a security breach in the early hours. My boss tried to fire me that afternoon. I didn't argue. I just ran a command I had written myself. System failure and $65 million vanished. I-29F. Never thought my career in cybersecurity would end with me becoming the very threat I was hired to protect against. But sometimes the system forces your hand, and you realize that the only way to expose corruption is to become the monster they painted you as. It started at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was pulling another all-nighter in our company's security operations center, monitoring network traffic for anomalies. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but the adrenaline of hunting digital threats kept me sharp. That's when I spotted it, an unusual pattern in our financial database access logs. Someone was systematically probing our payment processing system, testing for vulnerabilities with surgical precision. The attack signature was sophisticated, almost elegant in its approach. Most security analysts would have missed it entirely, but I'd spent 3 years studying these exact patterns during my previous job at a government contractor. I immediately initiated our incident response protocol, documenting every detail of the intrusion attempt. The attacker was using a series of compromised internal credentials, which meant this wasn't some random script kiddie. This was either an insider threat or someone with serious intelligence about our systems. By 4:15 a.m., I had successfully blocked the attack vectors and secured the compromised accounts. I spent the next 2 hours creating a comprehensive report detailing the breach attempt, the methods used, and the potential damage that could have occurred. Conservative estimates put the potential loss at over $60 million if the attacker had succeeded in accessing our client payment data. I submitted my incident report to my supervisor and the security team lead, then finally allowed myself to crash on the break room couch for a few hours of sleep. I felt proud of the work I'd done. This was exactly why companies hired people like me. The call came at 2:30 p.m. My boss wanted to see me in his office immediately. I walked in expecting praise, maybe even a discussion about a bonus for preventing such a significant security incident. Instead, I found him sitting behind his desk with a stern expression and HR representative beside him. He told me I was being terminated effective immediately for unauthorized access to company systems and exceeding my security clearance. I stared at him in disbelief, asking him to explain how stopping a security breach constituted unauthorized access. He claimed that my actions had triggered multiple security alerts and that I had accessed systems outside my designated scope of responsibility. The HR representative slid a termination agreement across the desk, explaining that the company was prepared to provide a modest severance package in exchange for my signature on a non-disclosure agreement. They wanted me to sign away my right to discuss anything about my employment or the circumstances of my termination. I asked to see the security alerts they referenced, but my boss refused, claiming it was classified information. I pointed out that I had documented everything in my incident report, but he dismissed it as irrelevant. The whole conversation felt surreal. I was being punished for doing exactly what I was hired to do. As I sat there listening to their justifications, pieces started falling into place. The attack I had stopped wasn't random. It was too targeted, too informed about our specific systems. Someone with inside knowledge had either orchestrated it or provided intelligence to external attackers. And now they were trying to silence the one person who could expose their involvement. I told them I needed time to review the termination agreement before signing anything. My boss became agitated, insisting that I sign immediately or forfeit any severance package. I stood up, thanked them for their time, and walked out of the office without signing anything. Back at my desk, I had 15 minutes before security would escort me out of the building. I used that time wisely. Months earlier, I had developed a custom monitoring script that tracked unusual administrative activities across our network. It was a personal project, something I worked on during lunch breaks to better understand our system architecture. I had never deployed it because it operated in a legal gray area. It could potentially access logs and data that weren't explicitly within my job scope. But now, facing termination for doing my job correctly, I decided the gray area had become irrelevant. I executed the script from my workstation, targeting the specific time frame around the security breach I had stopped. What I found made my blood run cold. The attack hadn't been external at all. The compromised credentials belonged to my boss and two other senior executives. They had been systematically siphoning money from client accounts over the past 8 months, using sophisticated techniques to mask their activities as legitimate transactions. The security breach I had stopped was actually them attempting to execute their largest theft yet, a $65 million transfer to offshore accounts. My intervention hadn't just stopped a random attack, I had accidentally uncovered an elaborate embezzlement scheme. And now they were trying to frame me as a rogue employee to discredit any evidence I might have gathered. I quickly copied the evidence to an encrypted drive, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. They controlled the narrative, they controlled HR, and they had already painted me as someone who exceeded their authority. Any evidence I presented would be dismissed as fabricated by a disgruntled former employee. That's when I remembered the other component of my monitoring script, the one I had never tested. It was designed as a failsafe, a way to preserve evidence in case someone tried to tamper with system logs. But it had an unintended side effect. If triggered improperly, it would cause a cascading failure in our financial processing systems. I had discovered this vulnerability during development but never reported it because it was caused by my unauthorized script. Now, facing the choice between letting criminals escape with millions of dollars or exposing their crimes through dramatic means, the decision became clear. Security arrived at my desk as I was packing my personal items. They escorted me to the lobby, where I handed over my badge and company laptop. But the damage was already done. My script was running on a delayed timer, set to execute during the next automated system backup. I drove home and waited. At exactly 6:47 p.m., my phone started buzzing with news alerts. Our company's stock price was plummeting as reports emerged of a massive system failure that had somehow caused $65 million to simply vanish from client accounts. The money hadn't been stolen, it had been digitally erased, existing now only in backup logs that would take weeks to properly analyze. The media coverage was intense. Financial regulators launched an immediate investigation. The FBI got involved. And suddenly, my former boss and his accomplices found themselves under intense scrutiny as investigators tried to understand how such a catastrophic failure could occur. Update 1. The investigation moved faster than I had anticipated. Within 72 hours, federal agents had seized all company servers and begun forensic analysis of our financial systems. The beauty of my approach was that I hadn't actually stolen anything. I had simply created a scenario where the stolen money became impossible to access or transfer, forcing investigators to examine every transaction in detail. My former boss tried to maintain his innocence, claiming that the system failure was evidence of my sabotage. But the forensic analysis told a different story. Investigators found the pattern of unauthorized transfers dating back months, all tied to the executive accounts I had identified. The timing of the system failure actually helped preserve evidence that might otherwise have been deleted. I received a call from an FBI agent asking me to come in for questioning. I brought my encrypted drive containing the evidence I had gathered, along with documentation of my termination and the circumstances surrounding it. The agent listened carefully as I explained how I had discovered the embezzlement scheme and how my termination was clearly retaliation for uncovering their activities. When she asked about the system failure, I told her the truth, that I had developed monitoring software that contained a previously unknown vulnerability, and that the stress of being wrongfully terminated had caused me to make an error in judgment when executing the script. I emphasized that my intention had been to preserve evidence, not to cause financial damage. The agent seemed to understand the complexity of the situation. She explained that while my actions had technically caused the system failure, my cooperation in exposing the embezzlement scheme would be taken into consideration. The $65 million that had vanished was actually money that had already been stolen. My script had simply prevented the thieves from completing their final transfer. Update 2. 3 weeks later, the full scope of the embezzlement became public. My former boss and 2 other executives were arrested on federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The total amount they had stolen over 8 months was just over $47 million, with the attempted $65 million transfer representing their exit strategy. The company's board of directors issued a public statement acknowledging that I had been wrongfully terminated for uncovering criminal activity. They offered me reinstatement with a promotion and substantial back pay, but I declined. The trust had been broken, and I had no interest in returning to an organization that had tried to silence me for doing the right thing. Instead, I used the media attention to launch my own cybersecurity consulting firm, specializing in internal threat detection and corporate fraud prevention. The irony wasn't lost on me. My reputation as someone who could cause $65 million to vanish overnight became my greatest marketing asset. Companies began hiring me specifically because they knew I understood both sides of the equation, how to protect systems and how to expose those who would abuse them. My first major contract was with a financial institution that wanted me to audit their security protocols and identify potential insider threats. The FBI agent who had questioned me became a regular contact, referring cases where my particular skill set might be valuable. She told me that my approach to the situation, using technical means to force transparency rather than simply reporting through official channels, had become a case study in their cybercrime division. Update 3. 6 months after the incident, the criminal trial began. I testified as a key witness, explaining how I had discovered the embezzlement scheme and detailing the technical methods the executives had used to hide their activities. The defense tried to paint me as a rogue employee who had fabricated evidence, but the forensic analysis supported every detail of my testimony. During cross-examination, the defense attorney asked why I hadn't simply reported my findings through proper channels instead of taking matters into my own hands. I explained that I had tried to follow protocol, but the proper channels were controlled by the very people committing the crimes. Sometimes I told the jury, the system is so corrupted that you have to break it to fix it. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. My former boss received a 12-year federal prison sentence, while his accomplices received 8 and 10 years respectively. The judge specifically noted that their attempt to frame me for their crimes had been an aggravating factor in sentencing. The civil lawsuits followed quickly. The company's insurance carriers sued the executives for the full amount of the stolen funds plus damages. Client companies filed their own suits for the disruption caused by the system failure. And I filed my own wrongful termination suit, which the company settled out of court for an amount that allowed me to expand my consulting business significantly. Looking back, I realized that the $65 million didn't really vanish, it was transformed. Transformed from stolen money into evidence, from a successful crime into a cautionary tale, from a cover-up into transparency. The system failure I caused wasn't destruction, it was revelation. My consulting firm now employs 12 people, all cybersecurity professionals who understand that sometimes protecting a system means being willing to break it. We've prevented dozens of similar schemes at other companies, using lessons learned from my experience to identify the warning signs of insider threats. The most satisfying part isn't the financial success or the media recognition. It's the knowledge that sometimes one person with the right skills and the courage to act can expose corruption that would otherwise remain hidden. The executives thought they could silence me by destroying my career, but they only succeeded in creating someone with nothing left to lose and every reason to fight back. I still have the original script that caused the system failure, preserved now as evidence in multiple court cases. Sometimes I look at those few lines of code and marvel at how something so simple could unravel such an elaborate criminal conspiracy. It reminds me that in the digital age, the most powerful weapon isn't always the most sophisticated. Sometimes it's just the willingness to use the tools you have when the moment demands action. The $65 million that vanished that day was never really gone. It was just waiting in the digital shadows for someone brave enough to shine a light on the truth.